that God has provided for every need you could possibly have through an earthly father.
I kind of knew it was confirmation. I must be going in the correct footsteps. I must be following.
Understand why.
Okay, welcome once again to the Advent Media Connect. All right, let me bring on our guest here. Pastor James, he's here. Welcome to the channel. Listen, we have an important subject to discuss today, so we're not going to waste your time. So let me bring him in. Okay, there he is. Okay, Rob. Berholf, correct. Rob Berholf, right?
Yes, sir. Nice to connect.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being on Advent Media Connect. I'm excited to have you. I had an opportunity to watch some of your YouTube videos. I kind of felt bad that I didn't know what you've been sharing. Some of the things you've been sharing are exceptionally amazing. One of the reasons why you're here is because I've experienced a balanced perspective in some of your contents that I think is lacking in the discussion. I've seen the far right and the far left and criticizing the condition of the church and even an improper failure to look at the Bible prophecies in the light of the Word of God, knowing how things are going to end. I see a number of confusions. And as I was listening to your channel, I was like, this guy is different. And again, you have a past, you've been in the church for a long time, done a lot of work, and been also disappointed in many things. But through it all, you seem to stand firm for what you believe as far as what God is doing with his remnant church. So that's why I brought you to the channel today. So just so you know, we are live on 3 different places right now, 4 different places altogether: Facebook, X, Contending for the Faith, I will say 5, and also Rumble. And there's a channel called Look and Live. Some of the audience is mixed. We have some Seventh-day Adventists here. We have some Sunday keepers here. My Look and Live channel have Trump supporters of all kind of people are there as well. So just, the demographic is vast. So you're speaking to a bunch of different group of people at this moment. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about you, Rob, and exactly what you plan on sharing with us today.
Sure. So first off, I want to thank you for having me, and thank you for really the help kind of bringing some light to this topic, which I think is an interesting topic, and all the work that you've been doing. My background is I think it's 4th generation Adventist, kind of went into the world, experienced what that had to offer with military, with business. And then the last 7 years, I've really given myself back to the Lord, just 100% wanting to look at what God has for us, investigating really just all the different truths that he has in his word. I'm currently running a leadership school in Romania. And also I just got back from a couple weeks in Canada. We have a second school that we had opened in Canada as well. So it's really about true education. That's really my focus, is how do we hasten the Lord's return? We read in 2 Peter 3, verse 12, about how not only are we to be Adventists looking for Christ's return, but we also need to be hastening it. And that's the same thing we read in Desire of Ages 6:3.3, about that we have the power to hasten the Lord's return. So that's really what my focus is. Since about the topic we've been discussing is a study that I did back in 2021 in July, and I never really I spent several months researching this question that Ellen White put out about that all people in the end time need to understand this book, and that's really the focus. And I can bring that quote up if we want.
Yeah, go ahead. You can share your screen.
Okay, so let me just do that. Yeah, so what we read here, this quote by Ellen White says, "I then saw the word of God pure and unadulterated, and that we must answer for the way we receive the truth proclaimed from that word. I saw there had been a hammer to break the flinty heart in pieces, and a fire to consume the dross and tin, and that the heart may be pure and holy." And then she says, here's something here that really caught my attention, because honestly, this was not what I was expecting to see. She wrote, "I saw the Apocrypha was the hidden book, and the wise of these last days should understand it." So from that, I was really curious, like, what that meant, because if she says that the wise of the last days should understand something, well, I think that's worth looking into. Candidly, though, at the time, I just did a quick little search and a thing came up that said, she mentioned it once, never mentioned it again. I was like, okay, well, I have other things to work on, right? So, on my channel, like you'll see, like I've created just a number of, just hundreds of videos on studying to show myself approved, a verse by verse study of Revelation, a verse by verse study of Daniel, and then, three angels' messages. So I really feel like I've studied to show myself approved. And then there was this concept of like, well, what is this hidden book? So I went back to it and I did a several month study, deep diving into what this could potentially be referring to. And I won't go into the entire details in this call, but in short, if we were to do a lookup of the hidden book, there's multiple references to this. And it's actually, what's interesting is actually her second and third vision. And that's something I don't think a lot of us know. It was at her second and third vision. And so if we were to kind of take just a sense of this, 1949 was her second vision. And in this vision, she goes through and talks about what we need to understand in the end times. And then she takes, we read here, taking the large Bible containing the Apocrypha. So imagine this situation. Here's Ellen White. She's at a home, Brother Curtis in Topshire, Maine, and there's different people, in this, little room there. And at the time, the Bibles had both had what we call the Apocrypha in it. And so the Apocrypha was a number of different books which were unclear whether or not they should be, in the canon. And so if we kind of go back and talk through what this all means. So the canon, when Martin Luther, as an example, created his biblical canon, he wasn't sure of Jude, he wasn't sure of Revelation, he also had some issues with Hebrews. And so what's interesting is that he put those books at the end of the New Testament. And that was considered for a little period of time the New Testament Apocrypha, just meaning that canon being the ones that are readily accepted and the Apocrypha the ones they have little questions on. And so ultimately there is a list of different books, and I can kind of bring a few slides up here, but there's a list of different books that we identify as the Apocrypha. And some of these are an extra chapter, let's say, in the book of Esther. And others are entire books like Tobit or Jeremiah. And I think what's interesting is just to kind of understand the historical context on these and to determine if there's any value in them. And so for me, I went through and maybe I may have been a little bit harsh with some of my, with some of my critiques on these other books. But for me, I would just say that, the Maccabees, those were only good in my opinion for historical value. Like I didn't find any inspiration in them. So I kind of went through and maybe I was a little bit harsh on Tobit talks about bewitching and things like this. And so I had kind of went through and narrowed down. And by the way, all this is explained in far more detail and it's actually a 3-part series. So it's quite a bit of content that I cover, but just to kind of give a sense on what this is all about. The one book that I think likely was what she's referring to is a book called Esdras, or first and second Esdras. And this ultimately means the fourth book of Ezra. So that's kind of where this conversation starts off, identifying that she was given this Bible containing additional books in it. And in her second as well as her third vision, she dives in and she starts saying things like, how lovely, how lovely, how lovely, my blood, my blood. She says things in threes. Then in a threes, again, she says, part of it is burned, part of it's the hidden book, and part of it is, so part of it's unadulterated, part's the hidden book, and part of it's burned. So what I took from that is that there's 3 groups. That there's the unadulterated, that is our canon. There is the Apocrypha, and one book of the Apocrypha was identified as the hidden book. And we can go through different quotes in the Spirit of Prophecy as well as other pioneers at the time. And there were a lot of individuals who at that time thought that Second Esdras, as an example, was was inspired. So this was at the context that time. That's their understanding. Now, what you're going to find with me is that I'm not actually here to prove the Apocrypha is correct. I believe that there is a hidden book, and that the wise of these last days should understand it. That's all I believe in. And so that led me down a path of really trying to figure out, well, what book could this be? And that's kind of how, and again, I do a much longer version as I detail this, but I think the important part to understand is that, again, this was not, this was not something that, they identified as, they thought it was that it could have been canon in their instance. And there's no excuse of taking the position that no more truth was to be revealed. Again, in her second and her first vision, right? She takes this and she is reading off of this. People says that there is sometimes asked if the Apocrypha is not in this book. So she's in this second vision. She does at the same time in this, she's holding this book up and says that the Apocrypha is not here. She takes the other book again. So again, if we go to 15 MR 66.2, you can kind of dive in deeper into an account of this hidden book. And it kind of gives a little more context to each of these. I think for me, really the important part is around this kind of concept of ultimately, where does this come from? And this is where this comes from. So what I am encouraging us to think about in this is ultimately that, that truth is, we want to be careful how we identify truth in the future, right? We have to balance this quote that, there's no excuse in taking this position that there's no more truth to be revealed, but also not going off the deep end, so to speak. And what I mean by that is there is a tendency for us to say, see, the Apocrypha is right because Ellen White quoted one book out of the Apocrypha. And again, I'm not here to prove one right or wrong, but I got a lot of responses back after the videos around the book of Enoch. And I think that's something I just want to point out real quick is when we think of the book of Enoch, it is actually not considered Apocrypha. It's considered pseudeographa. And that means with false title. So what I'm trying to say here is that, I want to point out that I'm not, some guy that's just trying to believe in every wind of doctrine. Like I said, I'm very skeptical of most of the Apocrypha, to be honest, and I'm definitely very skeptical against the book of Enoch for the reason that most of the scholars identify that this was written at the wrong time, as well as it's not included in the Jewish canon or the Christian canon. It's only in the Eastern Orthodox Church canon. So again, that's one piece. Also, why I'm bringing this up is because it feels like there is this almost lemming approach where we start to say, okay, there's something here that must mean that the other thing is also true. And I do want to point out that in the book of Enoch, which is a pseudeographical book, there is a story about how angels came down and they were procreating with, to create giants. And what we see from that is Genesis 6:1 refers to the sons of God as the lineage of Seth. And the sinful lineage, the daughters of men, was Cain. Also, Patriarchs and Prophets 81.1, Ellen White's very clear that the sons of God saw the daughters of Cain, men were fair. And they identified these as children of Seth, not as angels. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, was just essentially that this idea that just because I believe that the book of Esdras is true, not to just kind of jump off of not to take any sort of massive leap, so to speak. And I also acknowledge readily that there are some unanswered questions in the book of Esdras. Specifically, if we're to look at, there's this instance where this question of who is the Archangel Uriel. And I think if we look through this in the right perspective, what we'll find is that the Archangel Uriel is using this problematic phrase, my son Jesus, but if we look at the other context of it, where he's mentioned other times, he's always saying that he's just there as a guide. So it would not be, if we look at things in a larger context. Anyways, ultimately, I just kind of bring this up to set the stage really for this larger conversation about the book of Enoch and what this entails. Finally, I want to point one last thing out on this, and that is, if we are looking to analyze the book of Esdras, it's important to understand that chapters 1 and 2, as well as chapters 15 and 16, are not actually part of what would be called the core chapters. So that Latin Vulgate only actually ever had chapters 3 to 14. And the prophecy or the vision is actually found in chapters 11 and 12. So anyways, I just want to kind of preface that, I'm not this guy coming in trying to bring new knowledge. I'm not this guy trying to, stir up any kind of, excitement around, things that are going to distract us from the core message. But I also believe that on the other side, there are way too many who, either they're way too narrow of approach. And I don't feel that either being way too narrow and saying there is no new truth, that, many of those believe the same with, as an example, with Ellen White. Many of them don't even place Ellen White as having maybe, scriptural authority. On the other side, there's those that take and want to believe just literally anything because it's exciting. And so I just want to take this maybe balanced approach in the center that simply just says, that if Ellen White says there's a hidden book and the wise of the last day should understand it, we need to figure out what that book is. And if you do not agree with my interpretation on what that is, that doesn't bother me at all. We are to study to show ourselves approved. I have researched this and created what I believe the book says. And again, feel free to go and watch the longer video on this. But if we were to kind of do a summary of what I think is the interesting point on this, it really comes down to this idea of ultimately Hegelian dialectic. And in the prophetic example in this, what I believe the reason that we should know this book is because when Ellen White says the wise last day should understand it, I think it's a timeline that helps us just get a sense on the nearness of time. And I think as we are looking now, it should be pretty clear with the nearness of time that we are in, this kind of final window of time. But why I think this is interesting is because in this, quote unquote prophecy, if this is the final prophecy, maybe there's more, maybe there's less, who knows? But like I said, when I researched this, what I gained from this is that the next two presidents, and by the way, I decoded this back in 2021, so this isn't something new. But when I decoded it, I identified the next two presidents would not serve a full term in office. This would then bring about two presidents in the same time period, which would be the 49th and 50th, which I would identify as rural and urban. And then this middle head steps in, the papacy steps in, and ultimately plucks out the 49th and 50th presidency. And that would then lead into the National Sunday Law. So the idea simply would be this: if we knew how long until the, if Trump makes it, as an example, 2 years in term, we would know we have 2 years until the Sunday Law, utilizing this prophecy. Again, believing that this is true. I didn't even publish this for several years because honestly, I think there's more important things. And I didn't want this to overshadow the other work I've been doing with the Great Court Case, with pattern matching time, with understanding watchmen and light bearers from a scriptural perspective. Like, there's so many more important things. What is present truth? The fit man. If you want to dive into something, I highly recommend diving into who is the fit man in Leviticus. When the high priest lays his hands on the scapegoat, the high priest is not the one that sends him in the wilderness. So again, I just kind of want to put that in perspective. But that said, I think this needs some attention. And so what this is showing us is it's really showing us this concept that there is a Hegelian dialectic at play. And this is utilizing this right versus left paradigm. When we look in kind of in Marxism, right, we see this concept of unity and conflict of opposites, with this concept that if we can polarize the people, divide them into two groups, we can then utilize both groups ultimately to control the masses. And so this concept of a crisis is formed, a problem is introduced, the reaction then comes from that problem. And in that, we're able to then, they are able to introduce an overcorrection. And so every time a new problem moves, the solution moves a little bit, edges a little bit further and further towards where they want us to be. And I think that the idea of any sort of political affiliation and political identity is what is allowing this Hegelian dialectic to be effective. And so in this is really what it comes down to, is it's mass manipulation of, utilizing a crisis that we'll see as an example with Trump. And again, I'm not political on either side, but I think that concept is how we start to see things move. And so a meaning by that is, there's been a massive swing to the left, right? We see a number of different topics that then will bring an overcorrection and a swing to the right. And we're already seeing this. So I'd predicted this, halfway through, well, far before that, but halfway through, the Biden presidency, I said, this is an overcorrection. This is absolutely coming in overcorrection. And what's going to happen is this swing to the right in 2025 and beyond is going to be such an overcorrection of a swing. And I do think that if this prophecy, were to be a prophecy, right, the targeting of, a political opponent would then be a very useful tool to ultimately move a further swing one more time back, where it's this concept of we need unity, we need healing, we need a unified Sunday worship. And that ultimately would be able to take us from religious liberty over to returning to papal worship. And that's been the goal all along. And so what does this tell us again with the timeline? If this prophecy is true, and you can view deeper in the analysis of this, the length of the next presidency will be shorter. The presidency that follow will be shorter. And so if we say, okay, he's in for 2 years, that means that from that ousting, from whatever form, whether it's an impeachment or assassination or, dies of old age, a heart attack from too many McDonald's, whatever it is, that will then say, okay, then the next presidency, according to this prophecy, will be less than that period of time. So we would have a very clear understanding of our last call to sell our houses, our last call to do whatever it is to prepare. If it's a year, we understand that we have far less time than that. And the idea of the middle head, which is the continuation, he says, of your brother Daniel. Now, we understand that Revelation is actually the book that tells us about the land beast, which is America. And so even with that, there becomes some, a case can be made, well, see, this doesn't make sense because we're seeing the continuation of the beast in Daniel. Maybe this should be looking at popes. And actually, I ran these numbers. I spent several months on this project, and I looked at everything I could possibly find. And ultimately, the only one that has that meets the description would be the presidencies. But again, if you find something else, let the Holy Spirit lead. This is just my interpretation of it, and I'm interested in seeing if it plays out or not. We're going to know very soon if it does. Ultimately, the bigger picture is what this is moving towards. Is the great issue is the National Sunday Law, and that this will weed out those whom God has not appointed. And I think that when we think through the troubles we're having right now in the Adventist Church in terms of overreach, in terms of suppression of freedom of conscience, I think that we don't have to take any drastic steps, because I believe that what's coming will sort everything out. And what we need ultimately right now is a personal relationship with Christ. That's what I believe. But when this decree goes forth, we know that this is the close of probation. And so why does this matter? Why does this understanding of when this comes matters? It really brings the question, am I right? Right? Am I ready to be sealed? Am I ready to be preserved in the state I am today? Or do I need a closer relationship, a closer walk with Christ? And should I utilize this to really focus on a closer and deeper personal relationship with Christ, not to do things out of fear, but to do things out of love. As we do see here that, the Lord has shown clearly the image of the beast will be formed before probation closes. And so what that says, and there's other quotes that's talking about, when this national decree happens, national Sunday law or international Sunday law, really, this Protestantism, reaching the hand, right, ecumenical movements, then we know the time has come. And so the Sunday law will be really the marker prior to the opening of probation. And we find that judgment starts in the house of the Lord. So in that opening of probation, we'll see opening of the close of probation, we'll see a massive, well, Ellen White has quotes about how many, what fraction will be saved. And I think that this is a wake-up call to us to understand that when this happens, our hearts need to be ready. And so again, this is not about some, fantastical prophecy that's going to get us all excited. This should just be an idea of knowing the closeness of time. And the question then becomes, what do we do to prepare? And I'm kind of bringing in some different points because there is a quote people utilize from A.T. Jones that says, the day is coming when every Seventh-day Adventist in the United States would give everything he has and his life almost if he could be outside the United States. And the day is coming, not far off, when every Seventh-day Adventist will wish the depths of his soul he were outside the United States. So then the question becomes, what's this about? And I dive deeper in my video, but I think the understanding of this quote as related to, how this whole end of time movement looks is, when he says, enter not in the United States, right? Get out. This is God's call to get out, to cut loose, to sell, leave here. For the day is coming, you cannot sell, you cannot leave. I think the first point to make is that this is going to be global. So even if we were to leave the United States, we're not going to escape what's coming. But I do think that, and these are kind of some arguments that, by the way, that I'm just kind of addressing based on the feedback I got from the last several videos. I think what's to be understood is that this is not about salvation of self, but this is about, where do we need to be in order to get the message out? And so when we read about selling country, homes, and property, I believe that the reason that Ellen White says that every last one of us should know this prophecy is because I believe that when this next event happens, that is the last call to get out. But are we supposed to get out now or then? Right? And that's the whole thing, is that we should already be out to the cities. This should not be even a test of let's wait to the last possible moment to get out. And this should not be also a thing of let's wait to the last possible moment before we get our hearts ready to, to really, as Ellen White says, stand without an intercessor. I mean, these are heavy times coming up. And so I just wanted to use this time, and I'm so thankful, truly, for the time that I'm able to kind of maybe speak to some of the items that I think were lost in the context of when I recorded the videos. Because again, it's been a while since I recorded those videos. And I wanted to add some more context to this, that, when we start seeing these time frames, what we understand is that this is utilized in order to finish the work. And many of us will be scattered, right? There's to be a time when there will be a great scattering, and some of you will be taken away to remote regions. Why? Because God has work for you there. And so if God is putting on your heart this desire to do ministry, this desire to reach maybe windows of the world that have not been fully reached, that, let this be an opportunity, right? When this next event comes, this may be that final opportunity for God to impress upon your heart to make that commitment, to go do that. We read, to scatter as representatives abroad where they could work for others, God permitted persecution to come upon them. When we think about Jerusalem, everyone gathered in Jerusalem. When we think about Battle Creek, everyone gathered in Battle Creek. And God utilized the Roman armies in 70 AD and utilized, some issues with Kellogg and others to spread people out of Battle Creek. And so I just want to point out that, our goal is not to live comfortable lives and to be looking, forward to how can I get away from the times that are coming. These are all reminders that we need to ultimately, when we see what's been happening, we need to make the move. I mean, how many, Adventists were caught in the Los Angeles fires right now, right? That was likely a judgment that was likely a scattering to get people out and to spread the message that needs to be spread to the world. And it's not even through as a watchman, as you'll see some of my other content, it's as a light bearer. We need a personal relationship with Christ. We need to be able to demonstrate what God's judgment, what God's really what his kingdom is, what his character is like. And I think that that's what's lost in a lot of this. We get lost so caught up in the fear, right? And so I guess the point of that is that we need to be a witness to others, but it needs to be through a personal relationship. We read here that preaching is just a small part of the work to be done. And how we read here that Jesus calls for co-workers. And there's just so many quotes about how the love of God has been lost, and this means the absence of love for one another. Right? We've become selfish people focusing on our fear, and we need a revival of true godliness. This is our first work. Right? We need to be an acceptable cooperation. This is the work of the church members. It feels like so many of us are going to church looking to be fed, and Ellen White tells us so clearly that it's not about us just going and being fed, right? It's about us also being part of the solution, not just part of the problem. Really taking that personal love relationship, getting in and really starting to, do intercessory prayer, pray earnestly seeking for this. All the preaching in the world will not make men feel deeply the need of the perishing souls around them. Nothing will arouse a self-sacrificing zeal other than those working for those in darkness. And so our next move really is to understand what is the message of righteousness by faith, right? This idea of, can we perfect holiness? Is that even possible? And it is impossible without a deep relationship with Christ, because faith worketh by love. And if we love me, keep my commandments. So that's kind of my recommendation on next steps on this is understand the times we're living in, utilize this prophecy, which I think is a prophecy. But again, the message doesn't change even if I got it all wrong, right? Even if I got it all wrong, the message doesn't change. We still need to understand the times we're living in. We still need a deep for love relationship with Christ, and we need to follow where the Holy Spirit leads. And that ultimately is out of the cities.
Wow. I mean, I think this was great. Thank you for putting it together in a nice, succinct way, I will say. One thing I would ask, could you show the slide where that prophecy is in the second book of Ezra? I know you got into the interpretation part, but where was that found? So at least people can see what you are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can cover that. It's going to be found in the chapters 11 and chapters 12.
Okay.
And I can kind of give, like I said, I'll go ahead and kind of give maybe a little bit of clarity on this. If we look into 2nd Ezra 11, verse 1, we talk about this eagle coming out of the sea. And if we look at chapter 11, so it's the same way that like with Daniel, we start in chapters, we have, as an example, chapter 8 helps with chapter 7, right? Like this idea, like each chapter is then the chapter after it kind of tells you what the chapter before it was. And that's the same thing with this. And so, when we look at some of these, and I was just changed my slide template, so all the colors just disappeared on here. But yeah, thanks for, I always do something like that silly in real time. But ultimately comes from chapter 11 and 14. So definitely watch the full video, and I'm also trying to find out if I can change my slide template back. But it's this idea that he saw this dream of 12 feathered wings. And these 12 feathered rings were kings, and one ruled after the other, so consecutive kings. And so I did go through a lot of ideas, but ultimately landed on looking at, could these be presidents? And it says, the second shall begin to reign and shall have more time than any of the 12. So the second feather would be twice as long as any of the other feathers. And the only president to serve more than 2 terms was FDR. And so that checks out that Hoover would be the first feather, Roosevelt would be the third, the seconds, and then at the end of this normal feathers would be Clinton. And it then says that each of these will fall. What becomes interesting is that this start of this time period is the Great Depression. That's when Herbert Hoover was in office. And what's also interesting is that at the end of this, then we start to see that that there's another set of wings, another wing with another set of feathers. And on this set of feathers, we read again in 2 Ezra 11 that the next two had a great time. And so again, if we were to go back, this all starts with the Great Depression, with Hoover and FDR, which had a great time. Then it ends here, starts the next wing with Bush and Obama. So the same way that with Hoover, the Depression actually started, but FDR was the president during it. The same thing. This started with Bush, but actually ended up seeing the collapse in Obama's term. And so that's this concept. What's interesting is it was the greatest transfer of wealth in U.S. history, secondarily to the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, which is what starts the first wing, greatest transfer of wealth. The second wing, the next second greatest transfer of wealth. And so each of these, where the wing starts, becomes these two heists. Yeah. So hopefully that explains a little bit. Like I said, I recommend watching the full video to get the entire context, but I'm also happy to answer deeper if desired.
Okay. So the starting point of this prophecy, if it is a prophecy that's, based on what's written here. So let's work with what's written there. So the starting point has to do with the Great Depression and having a great time. What you're saying in your interpretation is either the transference of wealth, or that's the great time in itself you're talking about, or
so both. I think it's interesting that both wings, utilizing FDR as that anchor point, both start with the transfer of wealth. That also includes a time, as we read in Esdras, it also includes a time where, I beheld, and this idea that it says here that here it is here.
Okay, as for the voice.
That at the time of the kingdoms, this is 2 Ezra 12, 17 through 18. After that time, the kingdom, though, shall arise great strivings, and it shall stand in peril of failing, but it won't fail. And it'll be restored again to its beginning. So it's just interesting how during this time, the United States looked like it was going to collapse. And yet it did not collapse.
Oh, wow.
And then the second wing starts again with the Great Recession.
Yeah.
So 2008 collapse. And during those two times both times, and this was, it was actually, if you're going to get into it, it was due to Clinton. Clinton put in quantitative easing program. Okay. And that program was the one that ultimately led to the financial collapse in 2008. So while it opened up with under Bush, and while it happened during Obama, it was actually Clinton's quantitative easing program that he allowed through that was the key driver for the 2008 collapse.
Okay, this is a good point. Wow, it's a lot here to work with.
Yeah, I think that when we look into it, the question is, a lot of questions come up. Where did this come from? And there's a lot of people in the comments will say, well, I don't agree with your interpretation, and that's okay. I'm not selling this. I put it out years ago. Thanks to your channel, it actually got revived. Otherwise, this would be in complete, honestly, Jay, this would be in complete obscurity if you never actually promoted it, because my channel had 30 people on it until you blew it up. So, the point simply is, this wasn't something that I'm paying for advertising on. I'm trying to start a cult around, right? Like this is just, it's a research, and you see my other work. I go deep dive on a lot of stuff. So it was just one of the topics I deep dove on. One of the topics I truly believe is relevant. But if you want to believe that the three heads are something different, that's fine. Study to show yourselves approved. It doesn't hurt my feelings any. Yeah. Right.
And it's not a matter of
church around this.
That's right. It's not a matter of salvation. You're not trying to establish a new doctrine here either. You're saying there goes a prophecy based on your examination. Ellen White clearly articulates that there's going to be some hidden books, And
Yeah.
and based on your examination, you came to the conclusion that second address is that hidden book, and also the pioneers of the church. I've also confirmed this. So you've done a really exceptional job showing why your position. I don't see why anybody will have an issue with this, because you're not really pontificating. Neither are you exalting this above the word. You're not saying this is meant to take the place, or this is something that the church has to adapt. It's not like you becoming this new light kind of thing. You're not pushing that. So I'm so glad you explained your position from the start. And again, when I listened to you, I did not get anything other than this is a possibility. We're not saying this is so. And I was like, okay, with that in mind, let's consider it. Because what tends to happen in cases like this, because when you look at the case, the reason I'm interested in this is because, like, when it comes to President Trump, for example, like, it's very obvious. like you said, this man doesn't have too many friends. He's got a lot of enemies, and with so many attempts that have been on his life, you can understand why this prophecy is so significant. Just recently, again, there was another attempt. There were two men. They were trying to get into a convention center where Trump was, and that was just about a week ago. And with the drones in the air, so a lot of people are concerned, and it's very obvious, like. Only with God's intervention that Trump could even last 4 years. It's not because I have an issue with Trump. I love Trump. I think Trump is actually a better solution than the previous guy. But the fact is, and I think I would pray for my politicians. My goal is not to criticize and condemn them, because if they prosper, we prosper. But the thing is, when you do look at President Trump and you see how many times they've tried to unalive and do away with him, then that's why this prophecy became to shine. I'm like, that's a high possibility with all that's been going on right now. I don't know how else. Even the silence that there is concerning his election after the fact, he was called all these names, and all of a sudden there's the silence. That silence is even scarier, because I'm like, wait. What is the next plan? Why is there this level of silence? And for you and I, we know who the Jesuits are, and you mentioned the Hegelian dialectic concept. And when you study history, the Jesuits, any enemies that's crossed them, they find a way to get rid of you. If they cannot poison, they will explode you, Guy Fawkes and everything. Like, they will figure out a way to take out anybody who is a threat to their system and their goals. So I'm not sure how much of a threat Trump is, but it seems to be an issue for those on the left tremendously, at least those who seem to want to promote all kind of propaganda and also all kind of communist theory. But at the same time, you have those on the right who are also have some issues also that they promoting that's not always in light with the word of God either. So we have this double standard about things. So that's why I became interested in this prophecy, because I'm realizing, I'm like, you might not be that far off, from the truth here, So I said, let's not throw this away. Let's consider it and pray about it. Because I think when I hear something that I'm not used to, I don't know about, I don't fully understand, I take it to the Lord in prayer, but at least I put it somewhere and say, this might be a thing. So I promote it in the hope that just in case it were to happen, we could say, remember this guy I told you about? He did say, and he clearly showed why he believed what he believed. Now, if it doesn't happen, praise the Lord, but nobody's hurt, because we're not saying this is exactly what's going to take place either. So people have to think about that and make a decision when it comes to that. That's what it comes down to when it comes to me. But I don't see this as like, oh my goodness, let's just run and hide. And these are things we should be doing because the Bible already told us what to do, right? The abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, staying in the holy place. So we if they don't understand, like the Bible tells you, it's like when you shall see Jerusalem come past with army. So we are already told, and we can tell we are being sieged spiritually. Look at the speech stuff. Freedom of speech is under attack. So many things happening. So it's like the church should actually be ahead of their time. I think for us to wait for another prophecy like this to come to pass, for us to obey God's call, that's already an issue, because, and I'm speaking to myself here, because me and my wife, we got to make some changes. We got to make some moves. So I think these are the things we should just go along with when it comes to the scripture. But again, I will not discredit this prophecy. I wouldn't say, "Oh, this is heresy, unorthodox. This guy is teaching false doctrine." I wouldn't do that. I think the thing is you gotta give it time to see what happens. You gotta pray about this matter just in case. And again, it seems like the evidence against Trump, as at least the way that this is being waged. Like, if God does not intervene, I don't know how this man is gonna have even 4 years in the presidency, with the level of enemy and propaganda from the media and the effort to take his life. I don't see how any Trump supporter who's watching this video can know exactly what I'm talking about. That's just a fact, you know. Anyway, so I'm just
So,
at this point I'm waiting and watching.
yeah, I think it's also interesting to say, okay, let's say that this doesn't come to true, right? Let's say he finishes a full term. Then all that does is say we have to go back and figure out what she meant by right? It's like the point is that it doesn't change what she said
Yeah,
if my interpretation is wrong,
correct.
right? I do feel like though I sat on this for quite a while, and every year
Yeah,
it lines up. Like I'm just like, wow, and even what's interesting was I even put out that I put this out before any of the assassination attempts, before any of that stuff even came. So yeah, it's definitely, I think, just one more data point, right? We see there's so many data points out there, whether that's from the fourth turning, right, by Howe, right, whether that's from all the way to Blavatsky, what she says is going to happen this year. Like the point is like it seems like all data points are pointing to the next few years as significant times. And this, what's so important in my message is that it's not about fear. It's just about waking up. And now that you're awake, right, it's right now that you understand the times, it's high time to wake up. And I think it's so critically important to develop that love relationship with Christ, personal walk with him, and really praying that his Holy Spirit gives us guidance, because then we'll be prepared even without this book, without other things. So yeah, I like I said, I think it's so important to really look at what is present truth for our time. Look at the message, by the way, that's not being preached from our pulpits. If you want to really get into something, what's the message of righteousness by faith? The message that Jones and Wagner back in 1888 conference put out, the message that individuals like Robert Wieland and Donald Short tried to share in the third generation. Individuals like Dennis Priebe tried to share in the fourth generation. And I do believe that the message of righteousness by faith is the most important message for our time.
Yeah. Dennis Priebe is coming to the channel, by the way, in February.
Oh, no kidding. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I 180,000% endorse that guy.
That's
You can just tell by their fruits you'll know them.
Oh yeah, I love that guy.
And-
I've heard a few of his presentation, and he's coming to make a case for the spirit of prophecy. And I told him, hey, that's fine. But he is something though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, phew, this is great, man. I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
know I didn't get into too many of the details because I don't want to just kind of rehash the same thing. It's a really long presentation, but if there are any specific questions, I'm happy to kind of address those individually. But I would just say, if to consider just watching the videos as a whole,
Okay.
and I would consider also reading it for yourself, remembering that chapter 1 and 2, chapter 15 and 16 are actually not considered the fourth book of Enoch, of Ezra. They're actually considered the fifth and sixth writing of Ezra. So just a little something like that, just to be familiar and mindful with, if you do go to research for yourself, that you are looking at the Latin Vulgate or the New King James Version of that, to make sure that we aren't using because there are other versions of that document as well.
Got it. Wow. All right. I'm looking at the chat. Well, again, like I've said, my main channel is down, so we only have about 7 people watching at this time from the YouTube, and then the Facebook is about 1 at this time. So I'm not getting much comments coming from anybody.
Okay.
But it's because, again, the main channel will have easily garnered like 300-400 people.
Yeah, no.
But again, dealing with censorship is a challenge. But what I'm gonna do anyway, this video, I'm gonna postpone it and do a premiere of that discussion we're having now when the channel. I think tomorrow night, the ban is removed from the channel, so we can go back to doing what we do. Yeah, man. I don't really have too many questions because I've listened to you, and because I'll be honest with you, I think this is an amazing thing. Yeah, you sharing. I think I'm more of a curious guy, open-minded kind of guy,
Sure.
and if it's a possibility, and again, we're still questioning whether Second Ezra is that hidden book. Like we can have all that discussion, but that prophecy is fascinating, and if that
It,
prophecy is true, time will tell.
yeah, it's just it's so bizarre to me how well it fits in every regard. The depression, the recession, the second longest feather being, or being, um, it's just, yeah, it just feels like there's just way too many coincidences. But again, it doesn't change anything for me, right? It doesn't change. Like I believe we should already be out of the cities. I believe we should already doing these things, and that's actually some of the content I'm right now putting on my channel is going to put out a whole series on country living and outposts, how to develop an outpost, and that's something I'm going to be putting on my channel. And then at the end of the month, we're going to be launching a missional business course. And so I'm really excited about sharing more about that, about how to start a business that is also a ministry for God.
Great, great. That's exciting. You also said you have something about called a court case. I haven't checked that one out. Maybe we can
Yeah,
we can talk separate about that. I would like to read those notes because I'm actually literally doing a great controversy sermon this Sabbath. I'm preaching on that. Might be
yeah.
something I can learn from that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to send that over. I think what's so interesting about the Great Court Case is when we think of the Great Controversy, so many of us maybe have in our mind that it's with swords and shields.
Yeah.
Well, we find out, Ellen White's so clear that it's a war of words.
Okay.
And that's what we find is that in a courtroom, it's a war of logic and words.
Yes.
I think it's also interesting, just like the idea of what are the heavenly courts? It's a court case. It's a courtroom. And so what I do is I detail out all the different analogies that kind of lay into that. And what's so fascinating is it answers questions like, what are we here? What's our purpose? It answers, why was Enoch, Elijah, Moses translated?
Oh boy.
Why was there a flood? It answers questions like, since Christ, finished everything at the cross, why are we still here? And it answers questions like, what was a 1260-year period that I've never heard answered from any pulpit? I've never heard answered anywhere. And this one analogy just lays it all out.
Wow.
Most important, it answers the question, why will there be 144,000 and why must there be 144,000? And so, yeah, it's a heavy one, but yeah, I'll also happy to send you the slides on that too.
Please, that would be great. I would like to study that. Take some notes from there. I would like to get your thought on this quotation here. I'm going to put it on your screen. This is Ellen White's writings, and you are familiar with this, I'm sure. Yeah, there it is. So, in the light of you make mention of the California fire and so on. So, Last Day Events 113 speaks about Chicago and Los Angeles and how we ought not to build in these areas. And she speaks about here, large cities also pass before me as wickedness increased and protecting power of God was withdrawn. There were destruction, winds, and tempests. Buildings were destroyed by fire, shaken down by earthquakes. And she also said, this is the same. A similar caution was given in regard to building in Los Angeles. Now, we know there's an entire context, but just the fact that she made mention of earthquakes and fires in the light of these two major cities, I would like to get your thought on that. Do you think the California fire was a fulfillment of the words of Ellen White here in Paulson Collection?
I think that what's interesting is you could look at it two ways. You could say, well, if you say a big city and eventually something's going to happen in that city, right? You could say, well, it's been so many hundred years. Of course, there's going to be a fire, right? Now this one is a quite a large fire. I think there's another example, like she mentions Memphis, right? She's going to say that she saw large balls of fire fall into Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee. And so there's some definite predictions that she's had that haven't come true yet. But there's other ones that have already come true. And the question is there another application? Ultimately, I believe that we were told, and we really look into the idea of the abomination of desolation. We look into what is God's wrath. As we think through that, we're going to find that his wrath is a removal of protection. He has told us where to live, how to live. That I don't think we understand the context of it. A lot of times we think, well, it's just more convenient in the city, or there's people I need to reach in the city, I have to do the work there. But when Ellen White specifies so many times about Enoch and the importance of doing ministry work like Enoch, she says Enoch did not live in the city. He lived outside the city and came into the city to preach, to share, and then those that were of interest, he brought them back out to his country home. And that's the idea of an outpost, close enough to attack, but far enough away to shield. And I feel that, in some instances, Los Angeles has grown significantly, specifically around Los Angeles. And so some people, maybe were, technically in the country for a period of time until the sprawl enveloped them. But that's also a message that, okay, well, when the tide's rising, you have to keep walking backwards. If you're on a beach and you don't want to get your shoes wet, right? The tide rises, what do? You don't just stand there, you keep walking backwards. And I think there is a message to that. But also there's another message. We are to be the light of the world. And so it doesn't mean we have to go hide in a cave somewhere in the middle of the wilderness. There's still work to be done. And, while I do also think that, this is a ministry, any type of, online publication is a ministry that was not afforded to in her day and age. I think the message is clear, right? Far enough away to shield, but still got to be close enough to attack. And I do believe that there's only going to be more judgments pouring out on cities. And I believe that even if you were to take a secular viewpoint of this, right? Even if you were to say, well, let's just look at this secularly, what we find is, city life, ultimately there's more convenience, sure, but there's a lot more dangers. And also you're starting to put yourselves, like I said, I'm going to just take a completely secular approach on this, right? Just for those that may be interested in a different viewpoint. We have allowed ourselves to be brought into what we would see as really industrial supply chains. We're brought into systems that don't serve us, whether they're industrial education systems that train us to do industrial factory type jobs, factory type working jobs, that put us on a supply chain where you ask most people, where does a tomato come from? They're going to say, well, the store, right? They don't understand that you could actually grow that. Where does water come from? The sink. Well, it comes from the ground. It comes, right? The point is that there's been this disconnect of God's true education system. And I think that's what this comes down to, is recognizing what God's plan is, what his order is. Because in the great court case, that's what this is about. Is it the government of God and his way of living, or is it the way of man and his way of living? And we see the rebellion that came out of the lineage of Ham and how Nimrod built, massive cities, and that's what he was doing. Even before the Tower of Babel, he was building Nineveh. He was building so many other cities. That's not God's way. God wants us to have intellectual sovereignty. And it feels like that's what we've lost. It feels like we can't think for ourselves anymore. We can't, in fact, there's this idea of this growing tension, right? So many people, if on different platforms, you see this desire like, oh, we got to get out the system. We got to fight back. There's a guy named Bill Mollison who's known for a thing called permaculture, which is a style, really a mindset, a philosophy of gardening. And Bill Mollison's quote says, you cannot, and I'll have to paraphrase it, but essentially the futility of revolutionaries who depend on the system they wish to attack. And I think that is just sums up the entire idea, is that so many of us feel like we want a better life, we want a better way, and yet we're not willing or not even cognizant to break free from that which enslaves us. And make no mistake, the system has enslaved all of us now. And it's just so powerful to see how we've given away right of conscience, freedom of conscience. And we see how many people were even willing to take and put a poison in their body in order to avoid losing their job, in order to avoid being ostracized from going into a supermarket or a movie theater. And I think that that's this concept of really rethinking our choices and figuring out, do we have intellectual sovereignty or not? And I think that's a greater point. So specifically about the quote of from Ellen White, I believe it's true. But, that's this concept that I've already bought in to her credibility. So those that haven't bought into that yet could easily say, because again, I'm happy to have an argument from two sides, could easily say, well, you can, yes, she predicted it, but that was, 100, whatever, 40 years ago. And, that could mean, a broken clock is right twice a year, or twice a day, I should say, right? And so, at some point, some year it's going to happen. And that's what the non-believers could say that. And I would have no real argument to prove otherwise. I think for me, it's, the wicked will not understand, but the wise will understand. And so her writing is for the wise that are already going to understand. I'm not going to defend that statement to somebody that doesn't believe in her, because you can't. But that's why I bring up, Paul. I love in Acts of the Apostles, Ellen White talks about how when Paul was in Athens, he challenged the men not with his logic, but by theirs. And I think we lost that. I think too many of us that want to prove a point, I've never actually thinking about what the other side actually believes. So we're arguing from a space where there is no common ground. And I'm the first one to say, you don't want to believe in God at all. I'll take that hat off. We'll talk as atheists, right? Because there is a logical explanation to everything, right? So I can happy to start at that foundation with you. And I think that's the difference between the way I see truth and the way others see it. And so again, that quote easily debunked, right? But also the wise will understand.
Correct. I like that. I appreciate the way you balance that answer. Yeah, because I look at it from a general perspective, and I also look at it from a specific perspective. So generally, contextually, specifically, you can't run with that quote and trying to build an entire narrative on that.
Right.
But at the same time, that quote does give a level of credibility to the people who understand her writings. So, yeah. So, I mean, people sharing it online, I just wanted to get a perspective on that. So you kind of helped me to balance a little bit, because that's kind of what I was thinking. I'm like, I didn't want to promote it. I'm like, this needs to be properly examined. But at the same time, I don't think this should be something that we're running with and say, and then White is a prophet because of the following words. I'm like, well, she's a prophet because she has, we have so much.
Other reasons why I believe that.
Yeah, I believe she is, because there's stronger evidence. For me, it's like just the exaltation of Christ alone in her writings is the greatest core of evidence. Because what you notice in all false prophets, they attack the very deity and the personality of Jesus. No false prophets can have a positive view of Christ. It goes against the very system. And Jesus says that a kingdom that is divided against itself cannot stand. So the devil cannot cast out Satan. So it is contrary to the kingdom of darkness to bring a false prophet that will promote the true Christ. That alone, without even talking about her life and her prediction that has come true, not even talking about the context of the great controversy. No, just the fact that she exalts Christ and the law in her writings, that does it for me. But I appreciate you giving me that answer, because that needed to be heard. So that's another segment that I plan on sharing with my audience.
I can share briefly.
Okay, go ahead.
Something, and I think that there is really. I think it comes down to, I think there's logical explanation. There's logical conversations that can be had.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to kind of look ultimately at the sanctuary, and again, this is one of my courses called, what is inspired source of truth.
Okay.
But the short of it is, if we just look at the sanctuary system, it answers a lot of questions for us. And I feel like not enough of us have answered, have actually analyzed this. So this idea that every time Christ moves, a new church is formed. And we see this concept of the Israelites, in roughly 1500, where they were the children of the courtyard. And we see that through what happened. Like Christ came, he was baptized, his sacrifice, those were all things that happened in the courtyard. Then in 31 AD, we read that Christ went to the most holy place. Hebrews tells us, do you not know that you have a high priest in temples not made of hands? So Christ moved then to the holy place. This ultimately is the people of the holy place. And that was the early Christian church. Now, if we go to Daniel 8:14, 2300 day prophecy puts us at 1844. Christ moves yet again. And I believe that this is the final church until Christ leaves the most holy place, in which case the 144,000 comprised the last church triumphant. But if with that concept of this idea that there are three kind of buckets, if we go through these three buckets, we know, what did the Israelites have? The Israelites, well, they had the Old Testament, right? What did the early Christian church had? They had the New Testament. Nobody debates that. No one debates that today anyways, right? But what is interesting is the question, were the Old and New Testaments always accepted? And the answer is no, right? The Old Testament, which the Torah being the first part of the Tanakh, the Old Testament was actually challenged. Moses was challenged by the people of his day. Why do you lift yourself above us? Isn't God speaking to us too? Like, what makes you any more important, right? And we say, okay, well, what about the next, the prophets? Well, the minor prophets were also, ultimately, Ezekiel was called a madman. Isaiah was ignored. Jeremiah's prophecies, they're burned by King, so it, then let's get into the Kevilim, right? Psalms was downplayed as just personal prayers. Ecclesiastes was too pessimistic, and Song of Solomon was a little bit too spicy, as we would say. And so those were actually that formed the Old Testament. And today, we have no question that the Old Testament is canon. And yet in their day and age, they were all questioned. And then when we move forward to the New Testament is just journals and letters, by the way, right? Like, we think that just kind of this came down from heaven, but no, it was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were literally just writing journals of what they saw Jesus do. And then we see Paul come to the scene. And now here's a guy that, used to be standing there executing Stephen, holding the coats. Well, they killed off, Stephen. Now this guy's like, whoa, let me start sending letters to the churches. So he sent a letter to Rome, Romans, Philippi, Philippians, Galatia, Galatians, right? Like, we look at the Old Testament and we're like, okay, this is good. We look at the New Testament, like, yeah, this is totally good. But in its time, the New Testament was literally just letters to a church, right? So much of the New Testament was just letters. And then Hebrews was actually a little bit questioned, right? When we look at the final books, Jude, Revelation, Martin Luther in his canon was like, I think that's looks too much like acid. Like, I don't think that this was, even canonical. And he didn't believe in it. But I think God had a plan for that. God always has a plan. He wanted those books at the end because Revelation perfectly sums up the entire, what we lost in Genesis is restored in Revelation. So it needed to be there. So I guess the point I'm getting at is, if we start to think through this concept that every time every time Christ moves, a new church is formed, then if we believe the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the final church, what do we have for our source document? Who's writing letters for our time? And I think that's Ellen White, right? I believe that Ellen White fits. And, she's instructed that she's the Lord's messenger. There's so many quotes on here where, while she says, well, I have not claimed to be a prophet, it's because my work includes more than a prophet signifies. And people say, like, well, Ellen White even said herself she's not a prophet. Yeah, she says that she's more than a prophet, right? When we think back,
Yeah.
like, who was John the Baptist? John the Baptist was more than a prophet because he led the way for Christ's return, first coming.
Wow.
Who's leading the way for Christ's return? Ellen White. So I think that when we get into this, we'll understand that, yes, she never put herself above the testimonies, because the same way the New Testament is not above the Old Testament. The New Testament must still comply and be right to the law and the testimony. If it speaks not according to these things, then there's no light in them. So if it's not true to the Old Testament, not true to the New Testament, then there's no light in it. And that's the question is, does Ellen White disagree with the Bible or agree with the Bible? Because if she disagrees anywhere, do not trust her, throw her out. But if she doesn't say anything that contradicts the Bible, then we have to make a decision. Is she a prolific writer, or is she the Lord's messenger? And I think with that, she reads, my commission embraces the work of a prophet, but it does not end there. It embraces so much more than the minds of those sowing seeds of unbelief can even comprehend. Those that are saying that she is not of God, they're just unable to even comprehend. And that's how I look at it. Again, that's through my lens. And so ultimately, we are not to despise against prophesying. We are to believe the prophets, but we need to make sure that we're doing it through the right lens. And so if someone says, but she called herself lesser light, yes, she did. But what is lesser light? When we read in Revelation, lesser light is the moon. It's the Old Testament. It's the New Testament. Lesser light is the moon that shines the sun. So any lesser light points to Jesus. So Jesus is the greater light. We find that throughout the entire Bible, the greater light, so many different quotes. We also find that the moon is the lesser light. And so you're light of the world. Therefore, was a man sent from God to bear witness of that light. He was not that light. He was there to bear witness to that light. So John is talking about bearing witness, right, of that light. The prophet John was the connecting link between two dispensations. As God's representative, he stood forth to show the revelation of the law of the prophets to the Christian dispensation. He was the lesser light to be followed by the greater. So Ellen White actually calls the New Testament lesser light. Now, again, it's this concept that whoever is testifying of God, pointing to God, we are to be the lesser light, right? We are to be the light bearers. We're so clear with that. And so this whole concept that somehow the Bible is greater than the spirit of prophecy, I feel is without context. And I feel that if we understood that everyone used to criticize, all messages from God were criticized. But if we understand that and put it into context, we're going to see that little heed is given to the Bible. The Lord has given a lesser light to lead men and women to the greater light. So she's calling the entire Bible lesser light. Because why? It's to lead the greater light. So all should be leading to the greater light. And I think if we get into that perspective, I think everything changes. And ultimately, what does she give us? She gives us the understanding of the most holy place. And that is what we are. We are the children of the most holy place. We're living in the antitypical Day of Atonement. So we need to understand this grand truth. This is our present truth, right? To work in harmony with Christ, to prepare people to stand through the great day of God. And so anyways, that's the whole thing. So when we get into this idea of demoting the Lord's messenger, where in 2015, we actually changed our fundamental beliefs because some felt that the church's prior statement gave Ellen White authority comparable of the Bible. So in that, they removed as the Lord's messenger. And I think that was incredibly dangerous. And I think that when we look through that lens, we'll actually see that when they took out, as the Lord's messengers, right, they took out authoritative source of truth. And instead what they said was, rather than her speaking correction to the church, they said, that's what they added, they said to the church. Well, the difference was that she was actually running for the church. So when we see this concept of they removed for the church and they added to the church, and there's a big, big difference there. And I think that needs to be understood. Anyways, again, I could go on forever on these types of topics, but I know that that's not what we were here to talk about.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I've been studying this stuff for a while.
I love it.
I've got about 15,000 slides right now. So it's pretty much unlimited content. I just did a session with the students there. I talked nonstop the entire time, and I think I got through maybe 20% of what I wanted to tell them. So, anyways, my point is, I apologize for going too much into that. But
I know that
hopefully
was great.
it
I
is,
was
little
loving
foundation.
every soundbite. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing because I tend to do some apologetics on the
Sure.
internet. I see what you're saying. Some people will argue that are you adding Ellen White to the same level as the scripture? That could be a
yeah.
whole other discussion. I'm like, I don't know. I would like to hear how you answer that, and then I'll tell you what my perspective is.
Sure. I mean, again, it comes down to what's present truth.
Yeah.
So if we don't understand what present truth is, it's going to be really hard to even answer that question.
Got it.
And that's why, again, if we look into this, I believe that, again, it's all about the map of the sanctuary. So present truth, right? Each of these, right? We read here that difficult points of present truth have been reached by earnest efforts of few who devoted the work. So you can say, okay, let's throw Ellen White out. That's what Peter says. We must be established in present truth. So what's present truth? And this is this idea that if we kind of go through it, we're going to say, well, what do we find? Well, we find that it's whatever truth is pertinent to the people that it's in. and that present truth, which is a test to this generation, was not a test far back. And so ultimately, that present truth in the days of Luther is not the same present truth as us. So present truth in the day of the Christian church is not the same present truth as us. Otherwise, we're stuck in the past. So you can look at the Israelites as an example. Their present truth was to watch for the Messiah. Did that happen? Yes. Are we to be watching for the Messiah again as Adventists? Yes, for his second return this time, not his first. So that allowed, when the Messiah came, to move into the early Christian church. What was their present truth? To preach the gospel, right? Go ye therefore, baptize all nations. And it feels like this is where we're stuck as a people. It feels like this is where we're stuck. It feels like we're still sharing this as our present truth, and that's where everything ends. But again, that's this idea that, was this even accomplished? That's the question. Was this truth completed? And we read in Acts that the word of God increased. Number of disciples multiplied. Your faith was spoken throughout the whole world. In every word, your faith was spread. It was preached to every creature under heaven. That's a pretty definitive statements that this was accomplished. The gospel was actually preached. Now, if you get in the court case, we'll understand that there need to be a 1260 year period of time where Lucifer is given keys to the kingdom. And after that time, it was preached one more time. Ellen White says, from this time, foreign missions attained unprecedented growth. And 1843, she wrote that this message was preached all over the world as a witness. And in 1843, allowed Christ to move from the holy to the most holy place. And so each of these truths allow him to move. And if we really would understand that, we would say, what is the truth of our time that allows Christ to move out of the most holy place? Right? And that ultimately is what we need to know. So what is our present truth? Well, is the Messiah come? Yes, we're Adventists. The Messiah is coming. Is our present truth that Jesus can save us from our sins? Absolutely, right? But we're preaching the everlasting gospel, not the gospel. Because there are many precious truths contained in the word of God, but it is present truth we need now. And so if we were to look through this, what is our present truth? And we can go through this whole concept of, well, proclamation of the three angels' messages. There's no other work of such great importance.
That's right.
Okay, then that must be our present truth. Well, let's look into that, because we find here that the three angels' messages were there to largely, the health message was there to give credence to the three angels' messages. So without the health message, we can't even get to the three angels' messages. And so that's why we have medical ministry work. That's why we have missional business, invent some way to becoming acquainted people. That's all to point to the health message, to prepare their minds to present to the three angels' messages.
Correct.
Where it ends, is that the end of it. We read here, God's purpose in giving the three angels a message is to prepare a people to stand true to him during investigative judgment. So our present truth does not end with the three angels' messages. In fact, the third angel's message is our present truth. And that's this idea that we need, this is why we do publishing houses. This is why we do schools, sanitariums, restaurants, food factories. This is our purpose, to prepare people to stand. And this is what needs to be understood. We all need to be more intelligent in the work of the sanctuary atonement above. So who do we have to give us this information? Well, that's what we have a prophet for, Ellen White. Right? Ellen White is the one that tells us the message about the most holy place people. And so without Ellen White's writings, we don't have a full understanding of who we are, and will never then be able to help Christ leave. Because if we're to be co-laborers with him, right? So we need to prepare our characters, our hearts, because there'll be a time when there'll be no mediator between God and man. The plagues will be held with no longer. And many do not realize what they need to be. They need to be keeping the commandments of God, but not on our own merits. That's why we need to have the people. Otherwise, we're going to get lost in a message of works. We're going to be locked into the old covenant. These things you say I will do versus the new covenant. I'll put my
No. And that
in your.
that confirms what you said earlier about righteousness by faith, because we are told
Yes.
that the third angel's message is righteousness by faith in verity. So,
Yes.
and that message is not believed in the world either. So that is yet to be proclaimed in his full context, and for people to actually officiate the sacrifice and the benefit of the ministry of Christ. The message of righteousness by faith has to come forward, because for example, if you listen to the average Christian, and I was doing some studies furthermore about question on doctrine and the bound house and all that controversy, how that story goes. But at the root of it was a Calvinist view of the gospel, which is we're going to sin till Jesus comes. And that view was the very thing that led some of our men, good men, some of them, to compromise their position and kind of like do away with, some of the things that we believe in the sanctuary message, the deity of Jesus. There were a number of things, some hotspots that they've dealt with, but what you saw at the heart was there was an attack on righteousness by faith.
Yes.
That was misunderstood and somewhat compromised with the Calvinist view that was in the the Kingdom of God's book that they were trying to write with Walter Martin. And when we
Yeah.
compromise on that position, it's almost like we took a couple steps back. I don't think we've recovered from that ever since. We have never been the same Adventist church ever since. So I can understand what you're saying here. So present truth really brings us right back to that message where there is victory over sin, as we find in Jesus, right? They love God and keep the commandments of Jesus. So we can avoid both this law-abiding legalistic view that we need to avoid that, but there is also that liberalism, let live gospel. You kind of have to avoid that one too. It's two pitfalls you have to avoid, and you have to come to the
It's
center
order.
where Jesus really
It's
is.
the order, right? It's this idea that we cannot have works without faith, but faith without works is dead. James said.
Yes.
It's also interesting. We're talking about this idea of Froome, the questions and doctrines.
Correct. There he is. That's one of them.
Where-
There were a few. There were
Where
a
is he
few others.
buried? Right, Frida, Froome, Anderson, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Unruh, right? Where is he buried? And I think this is the interesting part. He's buried here in plot 860. And the question then is, well, what is plot 860? And if you actually call them up, here's what they'll tell you. 860, here's an actual slip from Washington Cemetery. Plot 860 is in Masonic Section B.
Don't stop.
I'm legit, dude. So if you want to know who created questions and doctrines, find who's buried, and that will answer the question for you.
Wow. This is gonna stick with me for a long time. Yeah. That answers a lot.
Look, it goes deep, man.
Yeah.
It goes so deep.
It's like when you go back to the Freemasons, you end up at the feet of the Jesuits all over again.
Yeah, but look, the whole impetus was what, right? This is the movement from 1955 to 1957.
Right.
We see, T. Unruh, he reads this article from Barnhouse from Liberty Magazine, and he doesn't want to be called a cult, and so, this is where Barnhouse invites Froome, Reed, Anderson together to be part of this committee. David Nichol, also M.L. Andreasen was also invited to be part of this, but then backed off. And M.L. Andreasen was like, no, this is like not of God. And what did they do? They took his credentials away. Then he died, and his wife was without a pension for a year until they restored his credentials, because his widow wasn't even able to live because they took everything. Dude, I'm just trying to say, the history, if you really want to get into it, we've got some dark history, there's no question. However,
It's interesting because M.L. Andreasen believed in righteousness by faith.
fully.
He was very strong into that message, right? Kind of cooperating with the activity of the priest and so on. Kind of like he was very much strong on that. So that's the guy
That's
they
why
got
they
rid
took him
of,
out.
so that we can have the compromisation we needed.
Yes.
What a pain. It's just crazy. So much you can learn from history. Oh, Lord have mercy.
Yes.
And nothing changed. I think we have the same issues until today.
To the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Did you ever go through that rabbit hole?
And no,
October
not yet. Not
22nd,
yet.
1844.
I need to.
1844 takes us to 1884. First generation, Ellen White says, had the people, through the great disappointment, held true to their faith, ere long they would be in the heavenly kingdom. First generation, Christ could have come. That's what people ask me, when's Jesus going to come? Dude, he could have come already. The time of the end was 1844.
Yeah.
Prophetic time is no longer. That's why
Correct.
people are trying to Rob, you're trying to do date setting with this whole second Esdras thing.
No.
No, man. If you go back in time, you'll see he could have come in the first generation of Adventism. Then the message was rejected.
That's right.
Ellen White says the church went into a state of formalism. They said, give me a king. If you get back into it, give me a king. We want to have a general conference president, the same way that the Israelites were asking for Saul. We're asking for a king. I'm just telling you, you want to get into that stuff, you can get into it. The point simply is, generation comes, 1884, 1924. During that time, everybody during that time was the reformers were in that time. Every one of them died prior to 1927. Every one of them. And that message in the second generation, 1888, 4 years into the second generation, Ellen White says in May of 1903, she says, had the people, she was doing a reference to, because Jones and Wagner are Joshua and Caleb. Oh, I can get into it. Like I'm like literally avoiding like going and finding the presentation because it'll just take, like, I don't want to get into that. But the short of it is this: second generation was Jones and Wagner, and they gave the message righteous by faith and verity. That message was rejected. Ellen White said in 1903, had the message from Jones and Wagner been accepted, we would be in the heavenly Canaan, she says. If we go to Joel talks about the cankerworm, the caterpillar, all right. Talks about these four locusts and all of these degradation creatures. And then in Joel 2, talking about the fifth generation, it's the rebirth. So we had 4 generations of cankers, right, of degradation. And the third and fourth generation, we got Froome. Fourth generation, we got Desmond Ford. And there were people in these times like Priebe, like Wieland, who were standing up for righteousness by faith, but there was no real movement. Nothing ever really took off. It's because of the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. We are now in the fifth watch, right? So in the fifth, I should say the fifth generation of Adventism, 2004 unto 2044. This is the final generation. Why? Because if you do the math, right, 8031 marked 4,000 years since the first sin offering. And that takes us into a very interesting time frame. We'll just leave it.
I had an entire sermon about this. And I was going in the book of Peter. He's talking about, a day to the Lord is like 1,000 years. And it dragged me into the Old Testament from Adam to Christ, and from Christ to our time. It's kind of like, so we are 6,000 years and there's 1,000 years in heaven keeping the Sabbath. So I was like, boom. And we can't set date. We still can't set date, but we can simply say it doesn't look like, and again, this is James, please don't run with this. It doesn't look like we have 20 years left. That's a stretch. If I'm adding 20 years, it's a whole lot, at least from my perspective.
Check out my course called Pattern Matching Time. And in this, I just lay it out. So I talk about what's the week look like.
It's called Pattern Matching Time.
Pattern Matching. Right? Pattern Matching Time. And then I get into what's a 6+1. Is there examples of 6+1 in the Bible? Tons of examples of 6+1. Then, is there an example of a Sabbath rest? What is the period of this rest? Right? Then we talk about, is there another example of a Sabbath rest? Well, there's 1,000-year Sabbath rest. Okay, that's when, right? So is there any other examples of a 1,000-year period in the Bible? Yes, there's 3 of them. One in Psalms, second in Psalms, and this idea of a day with the Lord is 1,000 years to us, right? And so it all lays it out there. It's so interesting, and I don't want to spoil the whole thing of this because just get into it because the storytelling in this is really interesting. But what it lays out for us is this idea that there's 6,000 years. The historians knew it, right? The Jews knew it. Right, this is this is Barnabas, Cypriot Jew, he knew it. Rabbi Kitna, he knew it. Right, Rabbi Elias, 200 years before Jesus, he knew it. And most importantly, so did the founder of the Adventist Church, J.N. Andrews. We think God chose a period of 6 days, and we're to represent 6 days of 1,000 years each. And so then you can go into this whole rabbit hole of seeing the contextual history of each of these statements. Ellen White mentions it 42 times, 6,000 years. And every one of them are conditional. If it's already happened, she says over. And she says, if it's not about to happen, she'll say almost. And then there's this whole thing of like all the 6 and 1s. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but dude, it's all throughout the Bible. This idea of a 6 and 1 pattern. And then she does say very clearly, talking about this final prophetic week, the 70th week, how when Christ was in the wilderness was 4,000 years. So 4,000 years was 27 AD. And 31 AD was 4,000 years again. And that comes into there. So we have this kind of concept of a final sort of time period. Not to say that this is when Jesus will return, because when will Jesus return? As soon as we get it together, because time has not been a test, right? So what is he waiting for? He's waiting for when the character of Christ is perfectly reproduced, he'll come and claim us as his own. when the fruit is brought forth, immediately puts forth the sickle. But yeah, I go deep on that stuff too. I'm with you, brother.
Oh
So with you.
man, this is good. I need to pick your brain, man. You have some amazing tools to work with. I'm a student of the word, but I don't have these presentations that way. I have them in sermon format because I do a lot more preaching on that. But boy, you gotta tell me what you use. What are some tools you can share with
So,
me as far as to get into
ironically,
stuff like this? I would love to. I would love to have access to some of these. This is powerful stuff.
So
Yeah.
interestingly enough, like all of this is freeware. And so, yeah, like if this is, I have a student course library and this is the link. If you go there, just hit request access.
Okay.
And I give anyone that requests access, I give access to this. And it has a list of all my courses. You can see, some of them are not fully done. Most of them are done. Some of them are not fully done.
Okay.
And it also gives you where you can find them on YouTube, the slides, and all these slides you can just take and just randomly opening one up on here. All these slides, it's in Google Slides. So you just come up here, file, make a copy. Entire presentation, you can take and run with it. It's
Wow.
all freeware. Like I'm not a
Do you
gatekeeper,
have notes that
right?
goes with those as well?
Yeah, so I usually at the bottom here, yeah, I write down what I'm going to say in that. In some of these, I don't always go exactly verbatim because usually I kind of write down what I want and then I kind of get in the spirit and I just kind of like just speak to it. I don't usually read from my notes, but I have notes in each of these. But the more important ones are going to be three angels' messages as an example. But yeah, I've got
Wow.
a ridiculous amount of content here. This is the one here.
It's amazing, bro. You have yourself an entire archives. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a wealth of study.
So here's an example here, like what is the watchman and the light bearers, and how do we know what the three angels' messages are, and how do we get into that and see, okay, each of these are right. So here's three angels' messages one. So these are the themes, right? Everlasting gospel. What's the everlasting gospel? And I just break it down. What's the everlasting gospel? Tons of quotes, tons of things, tons of imagery, icons, and all my notes are at the bottom. So my hope is going to be called Advent Truths. So my hope is that I can get this out, get this in the hands of people that just want. Look, I don't have time to create these slides because it took me 7 years to put all this stuff together, right? I don't have time for this. But if I can just take this, copy the slides out that I want for my sermon, then it's all there. Also, I have icons, tons of icons that I'm also putting out for free. So
That's in that file as well when you get access. Is that
no, but I'm launching. So if anyone that requests access to that, I'll have your email, and I'm going to send you guys access to where to get all this stuff at. Anyone that comes in there, but this is the three angels messages all broken down.
Put me on your list. Put me on your list because I know you do have my email, correct?
Yeah, brother.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure, I got you. But yeah, it's all there. And the hope is, how do we just like inspire a generation, just get out there and start preaching the gospel, right? How do we inspire a generation to just get out there and have everything they need to give a coherent slide, and they can copy what they want, right? Paste it in their own thing. They can change the colors. They can do whatever they want to do. They can also keep it the same. The idea is that we're going to be putting it out as this concept of Advent truths and being able to then give all these resources for free.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's.
Well, you were
that's the
thinking
short.
about doing an app or something like that, correct?
So it's going to be through this particular one is going to be through a website form where we can people can do a searchable, find specific slides, extract stuff out. So hey, I have a quote here. Give me a study that uses 2 Peter 3:8. Okay, boom, here.
Got it.
Here's like 3 stories that have that in it. And then I want to extend this, so I have a bunch of other slides. And so the way I do it, I call it like essentially a slide master. I'll just share my screen one more time here.
Because to put all these slides together, even the details that's in there, that takes a lot of time.
Yeah. So I have this concept of an ecosystem. I haven't really shared what that is yet. I'll share it soon. But yeah, there's all these kind of icons. These are all custom-made icons of, the 5 wise and foolish virgins, right? You can see all these icons that are here. And then I have like a bunch of different, headers. So actually, interestingly enough, this is why I did my logo. So these are all ones you can just kind of copy and paste. I need a pro versus con, copy, paste the slide out. Just a lot of different kind of examples that they can just kind of take and play with. Examples of, different parts of the world, slides like this here. different books from Ellen White that are already there that we can kind of reference. And then this is where it gets funny, is I actually went through and I have the header for every, if you want to quote like Review and Herald, but you want to quote it from like 1951, take this header. So there's your thing, but then grab the right header that's contextual. Like it's so geeky, dude. Like down to like, if you're like, this is a quote from 1967, well then just take this header and put it on top of this and then put change 1957. So it's like down to every, every masthead that we've ever had. That way it's like super like legit.
Yes.
But what this study also revealed was just how today we feel like when we go back in time, we feel like, the message of with the three angels, and I'm looking for the masthead with the three angels, and we kind of, here it is here. And we use this as like our official logo, and then we then switched our logo, and then everyone's coming out of things like, what do we do? We don't have a logo anymore. But if you really go back through Revere and Herald, I mean, that wasn't our logo. I'm just saying, like, believe me when I say, like, believe me, by the way, that entire, the symbolism in our current logo does come from, really, I mean, when we look at the Vatican,
Emerging Church,
they put out a whole concept, Laosi, the whole concept of this specific iconography. We're using it. It's part of the playbook, right? However, I have a course on the logo, and I kind of point out the fact that, like, back in the day, we never had the three angels, right? So back in the day, we had a globe, we had flames. So I'm just trying to say, like, and this is me just always trying to bring a balanced perspective.
Yeah.
Like the logo is not
the main thing.
Is not the main thing, right? We are to be. But yeah, I did go through and pull that out. Yeah, this is a slide master template, and yeah. Anyway, all of these resources are definitely available. I'd love to actually, when we launch Advent Truths, I'd love to do it in connection with you, and like, give everybody the links of where they need to go to get all that information out.
That'd be great. Oh man, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Man, I'm excited about that. Yeah, I'll be looking for the slides. Definitely, I'm interested in the slides that has to do with the court case.
I just put what's up.
Yeah, because that I'm preaching some of that, so I want to see how much I can take from it and add to my sermon already prepared. Yeah. Oh man, Rob, this was a blessing. You gave me much more than I was looking for. Yeah, man. I'm excited. I'm looking to see where this prophecy goes. What the Lord chooses to do.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a lot going on in this world right now, and there's a lot of concerns, and especially in the United States. The fear is up to the roof. We plan on being on the ground at the inauguration with Christopher Hudson and Justin Tobias, a number of other people as well, passing out a great controversy.
Nice.
So the family is coming and their children. So we plan on being there because we think this is an opportunity, regardless of what happens. Because some people are saying there's a possibility this is going to happen. We don't know. We're just going to go there, prayed up, fired up, ready to serve and minister to the needs of those around us with the present truth that we have. This is an opportunity. We're talking about well over 20,000 people are going to be there. So we shall see.
It's massive.
Yeah, it's massive. So, yeah. Well, Rob, I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us
Truly,
today.
it was an honor.
Yeah, you gotta come back for the church part we're talking about. We had a conversation about discussions, things that's going on in the church, and I think you had a really good perspective on kind of different, the different groups in the church that are popping up. So the loyalists and all of them, and so the principled reformers and all of that. So I would like that breakdown so that we can have a discussion about that. So I think we already have something scheduled, right? Is it on the Sabbath?
Yeah, I think it's the 25th, maybe something like
25th, yeah. You're on my schedule. Yes.
I'd also love to discuss more about missional entrepreneurship and how we can now take action, develop some businesses that are also ministries. So there's a lot of stuff I'd love to share, a lot of stuff I've got going on, but however God leads, I'm happy to serve.
Man, listen, man, we are open here. So you send me I have your contact info, so you just let me know whenever you're ready, and then I'll plug you in. I'm always looking for people to come in to share, so that's the thing, because I do my other videos on the side, but like throughout the week, I like to have at least 2 or 3 live streams throughout the week. And so any other time you got something you want to share, you're looking for a platform to do it, we are wide open.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Would you mind closing us up with a final word of prayer?
Absolutely. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this time together with a fellow servant. I want to thank you for Brother James and his ministry. Thank you for just being a voice and also being a platform. Lord, I thank you for just opening and desiring to share more with us on what you have. And we talk about how with your friends you like to share. And we thank you for allowing us to feel like your friends and truly just building that love relationship with you. Father, if the message of the second Ezra is not from you, I ask, Lord, that you just close people's minds to it, and that's okay. But if it is something and can be used by you in order to help us understand the relative nearness of the times that we're living in, not in order for us to develop fear, but for us to just understand that it's time to get our hearts right. Lord, I ask then that you impress upon that be the message here, not one of excitement as much as one of just a heartfelt desire to want to know you out of love and not later out of fear, Lord. And may that be our primary driver. I thank you again for just the heart you have in your servant, and I thank you also for an opportunity for Brother Wieland, a Preeby, to come on, and I look forward for his message to be shared as well. And I just ask that you continue to guide this ministry and bless it, and may we grow closer to you. Just name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us today. Once again, thank you, Rob. Appreciate you. This was a wealth. I got so much notes to work with here. I'll be going to your court case today. I'll be watching that to see how you break that one down. Yeah, this is amazing. I put a link in the comment for those of you who want to get to Rob's Berholf's channel. So that's posted, and that's going to be in the link in the description also. So make sure you go and subscribe to his channel and support the content, man. He's doing a great job. All right, my man. We'll stay in touch.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good one.
That God has provided for every need you could possibly have through an earthly father.
I kind of knew it was confirmation.